The moment I heard his mother's voice drop to a whisper, I stopped walking. I had only stepped away from the reception table to fix my lipstick. The bridal shower was still in full swing behind me, 40 women laughing, champagne glasses catching the afternoon light, someone's aunt already crying over the centerpieces. Everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Beautiful, controlled. A performance so polished I had almost convinced myself it was real. But then I heard my name. Not the warm, practiced way his mother usually said it when others were listening. This was different. Clipped. Clinical. Like she was discussing a line item in a budget. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, just outside the powder room door, and I did not breathe. "The notarization is already done," she said. "The attorney confirmed this morning. Once she signs the transfer papers at the rehearsal dinner, it's over. The patents fold into the holding company and she'll never see a dime." A pause. Then his voice, the voice I had fallen asleep to for 3 years, the voice I had told my deepest fears to, the voice I had said yes to when he got down on one knee in front of my mother's grave. "And if she figures it out before then?" "She won't," his mother said. "She trusts you completely. That's the whole point." I stood in that hallway for what felt like an hour. I know it was probably 45 seconds. My champagne flute was still in my hand, the bubbles still rising, and I remember looking down at it like it was something foreign, something that did not belong to me anymore, like everything else in this house. My father had died 26 months earlier, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that disease always is. He left me 3 things: a small house in Decatur, a letter I still cannot read without my hands shaking, and the controlling interest in a portfolio of water treatment patents he had spent 30 years building. The patents were not glamorous. They were not tech startup money or Silicon Valley headlines. But they were worth, according to the 2 attorneys I had consulted after his death, somewhere between $4 and $6 million in licensing revenue over the next decade. I had met my fiancé 8 months after my father's funeral. He was attentive in the way that, looking back, was almost too calibrated, always there when I needed someone, never pushing when I needed space, saying the exact right thing at the exact right moment. I had told myself I was lucky. My therapist had called it healing. His mother had called it fate. She had never once called me by anything other than my first name, and every single time she said it, there was something underneath, a slight weight, a fraction of a pause that I had always dismissed as nerves, as adjustment, as the normal friction of 2 families learning each other's rhythms. Standing in that hallway, I understood what the weight actually was. Assessment. She had been assessing me from the first dinner, calculating how long it would take, how much warmth it would require, how completely I would have to trust her son before I would sign a document without reading it carefully, because I was grieving and in love and no longer had my father sitting across from me at the kitchen table saying, "Baby girl read everything twice." I walked back into the reception. I smiled at his aunt. I laughed at something his cousin said. I refilled my champagne glass from the bottle on the table, and when his mother came to stand beside me 20 minutes later, her hand light on my arm, her perfume exactly what it always was, expensive and slightly floral, I smiled at her too. "You look radiant," she said. "I feel wonderful," I told her. And I started thinking. The transfer papers. She had said rehearsal dinner, which was 4 days away. That meant I had 4 days, but it also meant they were confident enough to have already notarized something without my signature, which meant either someone had forged my signature, which would be a federal crime, or the document was structured in a way that only required 1 signature to initiate and 1 to complete. My father's estate attorney had mentioned something like that once, about certain types of intellectual property conveyances. I had not paid close enough attention. I had been grieving. I had trusted the people around me. I excused myself again, this time to the garden, and I called my father's estate attorney from behind a hydrangea bush, while 40 women ate finger sandwiches 30 feet away. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I had heard. All of it, exactly as it was said. In the order it was said. He was quiet for a long moment, and that quiet told me everything before he said a single word. "Claire," he said carefully. "Has anyone asked you recently to sign or initial anything related to the patents? Any amendment? Any routine update? Anything presented as administrative?" I thought back 3 weeks. His mother had handed me a card at brunch, a birthday card for my fiancé, she had said. And could I just sign here so she could get it framed with both our names? I had signed it. I had not looked at what was underneath. Yes, I said. Another silence. Then, don't sign anything else. Don't let them know you're aware. And get yourself to my office first thing Monday morning. I hung up and stood in the garden for a moment, with the Georgia afternoon pressing down on me. A bee was working its way through the hydrangeas. Somewhere inside, someone had put on music, a song I didn't recognize, something slow and pretty. And for a second, I felt the full weight of what I was about to lose, not the patents, not the money, but the version of my life I had believed in, the fiancé who had held my hand at my father's memorial, the future mother-in-law who had said, "On our first meeting, your father raised someone remarkable." The wedding that was 12 days away, the invitations already sent, the dress already altered, the florist already paid. I went back inside. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I laughed at his jokes. I let his mother help me address the last of the thank you notes. I sat across from both of them at dinner 2 nights before the rehearsal, and I listened to them discuss the seating chart, and I felt myself split cleanly in two, the woman at the table, present and soft and easy, and the woman behind my eyes, watching every micro-expression, cataloging every careful word. My estate attorney had confirmed it by Tuesday morning. Someone he was careful about saying who, because he needed to verify the chain had used a power of attorney document that bore what appeared to be my signature, obtained approximately 3 weeks earlier, to initiate a transfer of the patent portfolio to a holding company registered in Delaware that had been incorporated 6 months before my father died. 6 months before my father died. That detail was the one that broke something in me that I had been carefully holding together. Because it meant this had not started after the funeral. Opportunistic and desperate. It had started while my father was still alive, while I was driving 3 hours every other weekend to sit beside him in the oncology ward, while I was learning how to say goodbye to the only parent I had left. Someone had been watching and calculating and preparing while I was watching my father disappear. The Delaware company had 2 directors. One was a name I didn't recognize, a registered agent, my attorney explained, standard practice for shell companies. The other was my fiancé's mother. I did not cry. I noticed that about myself. I had expected to cry, or to feel the floor tilt, or to hear a sound like something tearing. Instead, I felt very still, very clear. The way you feel, I imagine, when a fever finally breaks. My attorney asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to go to the rehearsal dinner. He strongly advised against it. I explained my reasoning. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You understand what you're asking me to help you set up?" I said yes. He said, "This is not how I typically operate." I said I understood. He said, "Give me 24 hours. He came back in 18. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room in a restaurant downtown, 40 guests, white tablecloths, the kind of event where everyone looks slightly more formal than they're comfortable being. My fiancé's family had chosen the venue. I had approved everything from the menu to the floral arrangements, because that is what an agreeable future daughter-in-law does, and being agreeable had been my primary occupation for the better part of 3 years. His mother had arranged for the transfer document to be presented to me during the dessert course. She had told me, 3 days earlier, that there would be a small formality, just a routine update to my estate planning that her family attorney had prepared, something about ensuring the patents were properly protected under our joint assets once we married. She had smiled when she said it. She has a very practiced smile, his mother. Warm eyes, perfect teeth, the specific kind of sincerity that takes years to develop. I had said, "Of course, whatever I need to sign." What she did not know was that 20 minutes before the dessert course, while she was in the restroom, I had asked the restaurant manager who had been briefed by my attorney to adjust the table setup. The document folder was moved. The pen placed beside it was switched with an identical one. The security camera in the corner of the private dining room, which the restaurant used for insurance purposes, had been confirmed operational and properly angled by my attorney's investigator at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And seated 2 tables away, finishing their entrees quietly, were 2 federal agents. My attorney had made a phone call. The forged power of attorney was enough. The 6-month-old Delaware company was enough. The fact that a parallel search had turned up two other elderly individuals whose estate assets had been transferred through similar structures, assets connected, distantly but traceable, to my fiancé's mother's previous relationships was more than enough. When the folder came out, I looked at it for a moment. His mother watched me with her practiced smile. My fiancé refilled my water glass. Everyone at the table was talking about something else, the way people do when something is happening that they're pretending not to notice. I opened the folder. I read every page, slowly, the way my father had taught me. Then I looked up at her. "This isn't an estate update," I said. My voice was very steady. I was proud of that, afterward how steady my voice was. "This is a full transfer of my father's patent portfolio to a holding company that you incorporated while he was receiving chemotherapy." The table went quiet in the way that tables go quiet when something real is happening in a room designed for performance. She started to speak. Her son started to speak. I set the folder down neatly on the table and folded my hands over it. And I said, simply, "I think you should both turn around." They did. The two federal agents had stood up. What happened next is something I have gone over in my mind many times, trying to find the moment I should have felt something other than that strange, clear stillness. There were raised voices. His mother's composure, which I had watched her maintain through every family dinner and every difficult conversation and every moment when I had said something she didn't like, that composure finally, visibly, came apart. My fiancé looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something between fury and something I can only describe as recognition. Like he had always known, somewhere, that I was not as easy as I appeared. Like he had underestimated me and he was only now, at this exact moment, recalibrating. I had underestimated myself too, for a long time. That was something I was still working through. His mother was arrested that evening. My fiancé was taken in for questioning. He was not charged that night. There were things his attorneys would argue about his level of direct involvement, and those arguments would take months to resolve, but he did not come home to our apartment. He went to stay with a cousin in Marietta, and he sent me a text message at 11:15 that night that said only, "I need you to understand, I didn't know everything." I did not respond. There was nothing in me that wanted to argue about the gradations of what he knew. The weeks that followed were administrative and exhausting in the way that legal processes always are. There were depositions and document reviews and phone calls with attorneys that lasted longer than they should have. The two other individuals whose assets had been funneled through similar structures came forward. One was the estate of a woman in her 70s in Savannah. Another was a retired physician in Birmingham. Both had connections to relationships my fiancé's mother had cultivated over the previous 8 years. The federal investigation expanded in ways I was not always directly informed about, but my attorney kept me close enough to the process that I understood the shape of it. My father's patent portfolio was restored to my sole ownership within 90 days. I kept the house in Decatur. I canceled the wedding, the florist was gracious, the venue less so, and I lost a deposit on the rehearsal dinner venue that I decided, eventually, to let go. Some things are not worth recovering. Some costs you absorb and move forward. What I did not expect was the quiet. After the rehearsal dinner, after the depositions, after the last attorney phone call, there was a period of weeks where my apartment was simply silent in a way it had not been in years. No plans being made. No future being constructed around me. Just me, in the rooms I had chosen, with the coffee I liked, and the fern on the windowsill that I had managed to keep alive for 2 years despite genuinely not knowing what I was doing. I thought about my father during that time. I thought about the way he would sit at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, going through every document anyone handed him, insurance renewals, school permission slips, the terms of service on a streaming subscription with the same careful attention. Not because he was suspicious by nature, because he believed that understanding what you were agreeing to was basic self-respect. I had let grief make me careless. I had let loneliness make me trusting in the wrong direction. I did not forgive myself for that easily or quickly, and I don't think quick forgiveness would have been honest. But I also tried not to let it become a story I told myself about what I deserved or what I should have known. My father had not raised me to be naive. He had also not raised me to become someone who trusted no one. The lesson was not never trust. The lesson was read everything twice. I took a new job in the fall, a position with an environmental consulting firm that worked primarily on water contamination cases. It was not accidental. My father's patents were in water treatment, and I had grown up understanding the mechanics of clean water the way some children grow up understanding baseball or church music. It was the language of our household. When the offer came, it felt less like a career pivot and more like returning to something I had always known. On my first week at the new office, a colleague asked me how I had ended up in environmental law. I told her my father had spent 30 years working on water treatment technology. She nodded, and then she asked if it was strange, doing work that reminded me of him. I thought about it for a moment. No, I said. It's the opposite of strange. It's the only thing that makes complete sense. There are things I am still asked about, when people who know the story feel comfortable enough to ask. The question I get most often from friends, from my therapist, from one journalist who wrote a brief piece about the federal case, is whether I regret how the rehearsal dinner unfolded. Whether I regret choosing to let it play out the way I did rather than confronting my fiancé privately, giving him a chance to explain, doing something less public and less devastating. I have thought about this more carefully than I have thought about almost anything else. Here is what I know. If I had confronted him privately, there would have been no federal agents present. There would have been no camera angle, no documented chain of custody on the transfer folder, no clean evidentiary record. His mother was experienced at what she did. She had done it before. She would have dismantled a private confrontation, would have redirected, reframed, produced counter-documentation, leveraged 3 years of my trust against my own account of what I had overheard. I would have been the grieving, unstable young woman who had misunderstood. I would have been the fiancé with the complicated relationship to her dead father's money. I also know that I made a decision in that hallway, when I overheard the conversation, that I have never fully forgiven myself for either. Because my first instinct before strategy, before the phone call to my attorney, before any of the careful planning was simply rage. And rage is not a reliable architect. I had to set it aside and think. And the thinking took everything I had. If I had been less careful, if I had been less afraid of losing what I was owed, I might have done something impulsive. I might have confronted them that afternoon, in the garden, behind the hydrangea bush. I might have walked into the bridal shower and announced what I had heard in front of 40 women and let the chaos sort itself out. I did not do that, but I have sat with the fact that I wanted to. That the version of me who wanted to burn everything down in a single afternoon was not wrong to feel what she felt. She was just strategically not the version of me who was going to win. My father's estate is intact. The patents are renewing their licensing agreements for the next cycle. The federal case is ongoing, and I have been told not to discuss the specific charges publicly, so I won't. What I will say is that his mother is no longer making plans that involve other people's assets. What I will say is that the retired physician in Birmingham got his money back. What I will say is that the woman in Savannah died before the case resolved, but her daughter received a settlement, and her daughter sent me a handwritten note that I have folded inside my father's letter, the one I still cannot read without my hands shaking. I keep both letters in the same envelope now. I figure my father would have found a way to appreciate the company. I am not someone who came through this unchanged. I don't think you come through something like this and get to be the same person you were before it. The version of me who stood at the altar 12 days after that rehearsal dinner, the version I had been building toward, she doesn't exist. And I have spent a lot of time in therapy deciding whether that is a loss or a correction. My therapist says it is both, and that both can be true simultaneously, and that the work is not to choose between them but to carry both without letting either one become the whole story. I think about that on the mornings when I drive to the office and the Atlanta skyline is doing something specific with the light, and I feel, for a moment, something that is not quite happiness but is adjacent to it. Something solid, something that belongs only to me. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a person who had decided you were manageable, who had looked at you and seen something that could be handled, redirected, made useful for their purposes. He said the only answer to that was to become, quietly and without announcement, exactly the person they had failed to account for. I don't know if I did that perfectly. I don't think I did it perfectly. But I did it, and I am still here. And the work my father spent 30 years building is still mine. That's the story I'm still learning how to tell. Not the rehearsal dinner, not the federal case, not the depositions. The part after all of that, the quiet apartment, the fern on the windowsill, the letter in the envelope, the morning light on the Atlanta skyline. The part where you find out who you are when there's no one left to perform for. When everything that was built around you has come down and you're standing in what remains. And what remains is you. Exactly you. Finally, stubbornly, completely you. I read everything twice now, every document, every contract, every fine print at the bottom of every form. It takes longer. Some people find it tedious. My new colleagues have started calling me precise, which I think is their diplomatic way of saying something else, but I don't mind. My father would have called it self-respect. I think he was right.